They say some doors are closed for a reason, but I've learned that the ones people try hardest to keep you out of are often the ones you already own the keys to. I wasn't expecting to prove that point on a humid Thursday night in Charleston, but life has a way of throwing you into moments that test your patience, your dignity, and your poker face. And if you believe every person, no matter their background, clothes, or skin color, deserves the same respect when they walk into a business, you'll probably understand why I'm telling this story. Go ahead and like, subscribe, or share it, because the lesson I learned and taught that night is one that needs to be repeated until it finally sticks. The evening had been long before I even set foot in the Rosemont Grand Hotel. My flight from London had been delayed twice thanks to a summer storm rolling along the eastern seaboard, and the air outside still clung to my skin like a damp sheet. I'd traveled light, dark jeans, a linen blouse, and my favorite leather tote. Clothes I could move in without feeling suffocated. No makeup beyond lip balm. Hair pulled back in a bun that had survived 12 hours of airport purgatory. I knew I didn't look like the kind of person most people expected to see striding toward a velvet rope entrance of an exclusive hotel lounge. But that was exactly where I was headed. I'd chosen the Rosemont Grand for a reason. 6 months earlier, my investment group, the Carter Hospitality Trust, had acquired controlling interest in the property. It was a jewel of Charleston's hospitality scene. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, vaulted ceilings dripping with chandeliers, and a history of hosting everyone from U.S. presidents to Hollywood royalty. The acquisition had been a quiet one. The press release mentioned only an undisclosed group of investors. I preferred it that way. When you want to understand how a place really operates, you have to see it without the fanfare. My plan was simple. Check in under a standard reservation, have a late dinner, then slip into the presidential lounge for a private sit-down with a few department heads. I'd time my arrival to avoid the bustle of the dinner crowd, thinking the quieter hour would make it easier to observe the staff without drawing attention. I should have remembered that sometimes the quiet hours are when certain attitudes come out in full force. The front desk clerk's name tag read Trevor. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with slicked hair and the sort of posture that tried too hard to radiate authority. I approached the counter with my reservation confirmation in hand. "Good evening," I said, placing my toad on the polished surface. "Checking in, Carter, Naomi." He tapped a few keys, barely glancing up. "Standard queen, 2 nights, okay." His tone was flat, transactional. He slid a key card across the counter. "Room 714. Elevators are to your right." I thanked him, slipped the key into my tote, and then, without missing a beat, walked toward the archway that led to the presidential lounge. It was tucked just past the lobby, behind a set of glass-paneled doors framed by deep cherry wood. A single velvet rope, hooked to brass stanchions, marked the entrance. I'd just reached for the handle when Trevor's voice rang out behind me. "Ma'am, that room's VIP only." I turned, surprised by the edge in his tone. "I'm aware," I said evenly. "I have business in there." He stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward me, lowering his voice but not his attitude. "This lounge is for executives, private guests, exclusive members, not for regular guests. You'll find the public bar down the hall." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he looked at me while saying it. A quick up and down scan, as if my clothes, my skin, and my tired posture told him everything he needed to know about where I belonged. "Why don't you check your system again?" I suggested, holding his gaze. "I don't need to check anything," he replied, standing a little taller. "The lounge is by invitation only, and you don't have one." A couple near the elevators glanced over, sensing the tension. Trevor didn't notice, or didn't care. He was already signaling to someone across the lobby. A uniformed security guard, tall and broad-shouldered, began walking toward us. "Is there a problem?" the guard asked when he reached us. "Just making sure guests stay where they're supposed to be," Trevor answered smoothly, his eyes still on me. "Could you escort this guest back to the main areas?" I could have pulled rank right then. Could have ended the entire misunderstanding with one sentence. "I own this place." But I didn't. Because sometimes the most effective lesson isn't delivered in a single blow. It's built step by deliberate step in front of the right audience. Instead, I reached into my tote and pulled out my phone. "Give me one moment," I said, dialing a number I knew by heart. I turned slightly away, speaking low enough that only the guard might catch the words. "Yes, I'm in the lobby. Let's proceed as planned." 10 minutes. Trevor smirked, misinterpreting my calm as capitulation. The elevators are that way, he said again, pointing toward the public bar area. I just smiled faintly and walked back toward the front desk, not to leave, but to wait, leaning casually against the counter while Trevor returned to his post. The guard lingered nearby, watching me, but I ignored him. My eyes wandered over the lobby's ornate details, the gilded molding, the sweeping staircase, the massive floral arrangement in the center. Around me, the slow murmur of other guests filled the air, but a thin current of curiosity rippled through the room. People had noticed the exchange. Some were still watching. And in exactly 8 minutes, they were going to see why I hadn't walked away. Because in 8 minutes, the real test of the Rosemont Grand's hospitality wasn't going to be whether they could keep someone out of a VIP lounge. It was going to be how quickly they realized they'd just tried to keep the owner herself from walking in. And I was going to let them figure that out the hard way. 8 minutes later, right on schedule, the atmosphere in the Rosemont Grand lobby shifted like someone had turned the air up a notch. I spotted the first signal, the glass doors at the entrance swinging open with more force than necessary, letting in a rush of humid Charleston night air. Through them strode the general manager, Richard Ames, a tall man whose usual country club composure had been replaced with the tight, hurried expression of someone realizing they'd already lost control of a situation. Right behind him came Marisol Vega, the head of hotel security, a woman I'd known from my first acquisition site visit, and two senior executives I recognized from board meetings, both of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. They were moving fast, scanning the lobby as if expecting a crisis. Their eyes landed on me. "Dr. Carter." Ames' voice cracked in the middle, equal parts shock and panic. He changed direction mid-stride, nearly colliding with a bellhop in his rush to reach me. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow morning." I straightened from my casual lean against the front desk. "Clearly," I said. Trevor, still behind the counter, blinked at the sudden shift in tone. "Dr. Carter?" he repeated quietly, glancing between me and the GM. Before Ames could launch into whatever damage control script he was rehearsing in his head, I opened my tote and pulled out a slim leather folio. The snap of its clasp opening was louder than it needed to be, but the sound carried, and several heads in the lobby turned toward us. "Since Trevor here seems concerned about my access to the presidential lounge," I said, laying a neat stack of documents on the counter, "perhaps you should explain to him that the lounge, along with this entire property, falls under the Carter Hospitality Trust portfolio." The words landed like a glass breaking in a quiet room. Gasps rippled from a group of guests seated near the staircase. The uniformed security guard who'd been watching me earlier froze mid-step. Even the concierge, halfway across the lobby, straightened as if she'd just been caught in the wrong room. Trevor's mouth opened, closed, then opened again without a single coherent sound escaping. His eyes darted to the GM, then to the documents on the counter, shareholder agreements, acquisition papers, and the press release he'd clearly never read. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't lower it either. The words were for him, but I wanted them to reach every ear in the lobby. 6 months ago, my group acquired controlling interest in the Rosemont Grand. I came tonight, under a standard reservation, to evaluate service quality firsthand. I let the pause stretch just long enough for a few nearby guests to lean in. "I think I've seen enough." The GM looked like he was internally calculating just how much damage this was going to cost him. Not just financially, but in the ripple effect of whispers, phone videos, and social media posts already in the making. A middle-aged man in a linen suit across the lobby was blatantly filming on his phone. Trevor, to his credit, tried to salvage something. I didn't know." "That's exactly the point." I cut in smoothly. "You didn't know? And your default response to not knowing was to assume I didn't belong here." He flinched, and I let the silence hang there. People needed to feel the weight of a moment like this, not for humiliation's sake, but for the lesson in it. Ames cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably under the eyes of what now felt like the entire lobby. "Dr. Carter, if you'd like, we can escort you to the presidential lounge immediately," and I turned to face him fully. "Escort me? Richard, I don't need an escort into my own property. What I need is to know how often moments like this happen when I'm not here to witness them." A subtle murmur rolled through the room, like a breeze across still water. By now, Marisol had stepped closer, clearly reading the temperature of the scene. She gave me a small nod, the kind that said she understood more than she'd say out loud in front of an audience. I'd like a staff meeting called for tomorrow morning, I continued, still addressing Ames, and I want every department head there. We'll be doing a service and bias awareness audit starting immediately. Also, until further notice, the complaint review process is to be overseen by my office directly. Trevor looked down at the counter, his cheeks blotched red. I could have dismissed him on the spot. Lord knows, plenty of owners would have, especially in front of this many witnesses. But firing him right here, right now, wouldn't fix the system that made him feel entitled to treat a paying guest the way he had. That was tomorrow's conversation. Right now, the priority was showing everyone, staff and guests alike, that ownership doesn't just mean holding the deed. It means setting the tone. I gathered my folio, slipped the documents back inside, and gestured toward the glass-paneled doors. Let's go to the lounge, Richard. We've kept our department heads waiting long enough. As we walked past the velvet rope, the stanchion was quietly moved aside by a bellhop who wouldn't meet my eyes but held the door like it was a peace offering. Inside, the presidential lounge glowed with warm lamplight and the quiet clink of glassware. The department heads, seated at a long polished table, rose when they saw me. Richard tried to ease into small talk, but I kept my focus sharp. Before we begin, let me make one thing clear. The way a guest looks, dresses, or speaks should never be used to decide whether they belong in any part of this hotel. That applies to our most exclusive rooms as much as to the lobby floor. I could see the ripple of discomfort in a few faces. Others nodded, either in agreement or relief. I didn't need to know which yet. I'd find out soon enough. Somewhere outside the lounge's closed doors, I knew the story was already spreading through the building, told in whispers at the front desk, passed along between bellhops, muttered in the service hallways. By morning, it would be on the phones of half the guests in the building. And honestly, that was fine, because if the Rosemont Grand was going to carry my name on its ownership papers, it was also going to carry my standard for how people are treated. And that standard had just been set, very publicly. The next morning, the Rosemont Grand's ballroom felt different. The chandeliers still cast their golden glow, the heavy drapes still muffled the street noise outside, but there was a tension in the air you could almost taste. Every department head, shift supervisor, and line manager had been summoned for the all-staff meeting I'd ordered. Rows of banquet chairs faced the stage, and the low murmur of voices stopped as soon as I stepped up to the podium. I didn't have to tell them what this was about. News travels fast in a hotel, faster than in most industries. By breakfast service, everyone from the pastry chef to the night audit clerk had heard some version of the story. A guest being told she didn't belong in the presidential lounge, then revealed as the owner of the property. And while the details shifted with each retelling, the core of it was unchanged. Let me be clear. I began, my voice carrying easily across the room. What happened last night was not an isolated misunderstanding. It was a symptom of something deeper. And if we're going to be the standard for hospitality in this city, it cannot continue. Eyes darted, shoulders shifted. A few people kept their gazes fixed on the patterned carpet as though the answer might be woven into the threads. I laid it out plainly. Mandatory bias awareness training for all staff, from housekeeping to executive leadership. A new anonymous reporting line for guests and employees to report discriminatory behavior, managed by an outside firm to guarantee transparency. Quarterly service audits conducted without prior notice. And yes, disciplinary action where it was warranted. That last part drew a subtle ripple of unease, but I didn't soften it. We cannot offer our guests genuine hospitality if our first instinct is to measure whether they look like they belong, I said. The moment a guest walks through our doors, they do belong. Period. When the meeting adjourned, Richard Ames pulled me aside to confirm Trevor's status. I decided against a public firing. Instead, Trevor was reassigned to a non-guest-facing position while undergoing retraining, with his future at the hotel contingent on his progress. It wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about setting an example. Accountability is sharper when it's part of a system, not just a single spectacle. Over the next 2 weeks, the changes rolled out fast. The training modules went live. The anonymous hotline started fielding reports, some small, like a bartender skipping a table that looked too casual, and some serious, like a concierge steering certain guests toward lower-rated partner restaurants instead of the flagship venues. Patterns emerged, and we addressed them one by one. Guests noticed, too. Reviews on travel sites began mentioning how welcome they felt, even when arriving in wrinkled clothes after a long flight or asking for budget-friendly recommendations. One particularly touching review came from a family who had never stayed in a high-end hotel before and had expected to feel out of place. Instead, they wrote, "We were treated like we were the only guests in the building." That was the win I wanted. 3 months later, I returned to the Rosemont Grand unannounced. It was a Friday evening, the lobby humming with activity, couples checking in for weekend getaways, business travelers wheeling carry-ons toward the elevators, a wedding party laughing near the bar. I watched the front desk from a distance. The new clerk, a young woman named Mia, greeted every guest with the same warm tone, whether they were wearing tailored suits or faded t-shirts. I decided to test the system. I approached the velvet rope outside the presidential lounge without announcing myself. Mia noticed and came over. "Good evening," she said with a smile. "May I check your access for the lounge?" Her tone was friendly, not suspicious. I handed over my key card. She scanned it, nodded, and unhooked the rope. "Enjoy your evening, Dr. Carter. Let me know if there's anything you need." No hesitation, no sideways glances, just professionalism. That was the standard I'd wanted to see. Inside, the lounge was lively but not crowded. The same long polished table gleamed under the soft light, and the staff moved with quiet efficiency. A server approached with a menu, introducing herself and offering me a seat by the window. I looked out at the Charleston skyline, its church spires and brick rooftops glowing in the fading light, and felt a satisfaction deeper than any quarterly profit report could give me. This wasn't just about one hotel. It was about creating a blueprint. If a property bearing my name could prove that equal treatment wasn't just good ethics, but good business, then maybe other owners, other managers, other investors would follow. 6 months after that first night, Carter Hospitality Trust had implemented the same audit and training system in all 14 properties we owned. Some changes were small, rewording check-in scripts to remove unconscious biases, rotating staff between guest-facing and behind-the-scenes roles. Others were bigger, partnering with local organizations to recruit and train employees from underrepresented communities, ensuring the staff better reflected the guests they served. One evening, while reviewing quarterly reports in my office, I received an email from Trevor. It was short, almost hesitant. He thanked me for not firing me on the spot and explained that the training had been eye-opening. He admitted he hadn't realized how much his assumptions shaped his behavior, and that learning to challenge them had made him better not just at his job, but in his personal life. He'd just been promoted to a supervisor role in the hotel's events department. I read it twice. That's the thing about leadership. Sometimes the quiet victories matter as much as the public ones. Last week, I was back in Charleston for a hospitality investors summit. I stayed at the Rosemont Grand, naturally, and on my last morning, I stopped in the lobby before heading to the airport. A young couple had just arrived, their suitcases scuffed, their clothes travel-rumpled. Mia greeted them like old friends, offered water, and walked them through the check-in process without a flicker of judgment. The couple glanced around at the marble floors and chandeliers, looking slightly overwhelmed, but they relaxed as Mia chatted with them. That's when I knew the change had stuck. Not because the staff feared being caught, but because respect had become part of the culture. As I stepped into my car, I thought back to that first humid night when Trevor's voice had stopped me at the lounge door. If you told me then that the confrontation would lead to systemic changes across my entire portfolio, I might have smiled at the irony. But here we were. Sometimes ownership isn't just about property. It's about owning the responsibility to shape the space for every guest, every time. And I intended to keep doing exactly that.